Hey, what's going on? My name is Vic Barry. This is the Sony ZV-1 and today we're going to be taking a look at the settings for video in the Sony ZV-1 so you can make amazing looking videos. Let's get into it. When you press the menu button on the back of the camera for the first time or any time, chances are you're probably going to see this or the last place where you were in the menu settings. So you can quickly scroll down and you can go left to right and you can go through all the menu options and eventually you get onto the next menu. So this video is all about the movie settings. So it can be a bit of a pain to kind of tap left and right and to get to where you want. So I've got a really great little trick here, and that's the FN button on the back of the camera. If you press that, it's going to go from section to section to section to section, and now to the movie mode where we want to talk about these settings. So the first one I'm going to talk about here is file format. So what you want to shoot in 4K, 1080, or AVC. Let's pretend AVC doesn't exist, but it has its uses, I'm sure, somewhere. So XAVC HD is going to give you some different options here in the record setting. So that's 24p 50 megabytes per second, 30 and 120 frames per second if you're doing slow-mo, but more in slow motion settings momentarily. So all of this is a maximum of 1920 by 1080 full HD, which looks really good. But do you want to shoot in 4K? Of course you do, right, Vic? Sure. So let's go back, let's select file format, let's go to XAVC 4K. Now we got some different options in here. Essentially we've got 24 and 30 frames per second at 100 megabits per second or 60 megabits per second. Now which should you use here? Personally, I'm a big fan of using 4K because it gives you extra room in post-production to crop in and zoom in without losing any quality. And 100 megabits per second basically is the data rate that the camera is recording. So the higher number this is, the better your video is going to look. The only downside of shooting 4K and 100 megabits per second, if you've got like a 16 gig SD card or a 32 gig SD card, chances are you're going to chew through that space quickly. But 128 gig SD cards and 64 gig are relatively cheap, and unless you're shooting like the extended edition of Lord of the Rings 3 times over, you'll be pretty okay. By the way as well, don't be worried about frame rates, whether it's 24p or 30p if you're a purist obviously, but if you're just starting out, select which one you'd like. 30p is a little bit smoother, 24p is a little bit more motion blurry and cinematic. But don't worry about it. But for me, I kind of always shoot 24p 100 megabits per second. Now let's jump down to high frame rate settings. This is the slow motion that we talked about. So whether your record setting is going to be 60p or 30p or 24p, that's option 1, and then the frame rate. So basically if you do 960 frames per second, it's going to be super slow motion and super unusable because at 960, the Sony ZV-1 is not great. It crops in a lot. The quality of the video is really, really poor. And for the size of the camera, it's amazing it's able to do it at all. But I would say go no higher than 240 frames per Peter McKinnon. It's probably something that you're going to be absolutely thrilled with. Priority setting here. So essentially what this is going to do, it's going to prioritize over quality or shoot time. I would suggest sticking with quality because the most quality you can squeeze out of the camera, the better it's going to look at the end of the day, right? Right. And then the record timing. So when you're doing a slow motion video, obviously you're shooting something that's going to happen. And sometimes you might miss pressing record at the right time, but what if you could press record after all had happened and you got the timing exactly right? So let's say you got a pie into the face. Let's say you wanted to start recording after the pie had hit your face and you want to record the last few seconds. This is where you select the end trigger. And that's when you press after what you want to record has happened. Really great option. All right, so let's jump back here. Quality dual recording, if you're kind of taking photos in that during video mode, this is the quality of those pictures, whether they're extra fine, fine, or standard. Want the best quality, stick it on extra fine. Let's go on to page 2. The image size of the dual recording, again, these is taking photos during the actual video if you're going to be doing that. So we've got large, medium, or small. Again, stick it on large, 17 megapixels. 17, but you get on it, right? Proxy recording. If you've been watching my videos for a while, you might have heard me speak about proxy recording. So essentially what proxy recording is, it shoots a very low-res version of your big 4K file, and that means it's a lot easier to edit in post-production. Personally, on something like this, I don't use the proxy recording. Instead, you can just very, very quickly create a proxy recording in Adobe Premiere, for example. You can right-click in the file, select Create Proxy, and away you go, and you can edit your footage like smooth, like butter, knife butter, and all that kind of other cliches. The autofocus drive speed, whether you can set it to fast, normal or slow, and keep in mind if you're wondering what does this do, press the trash can icon on the actual camera itself and it gives you an info display. So we can see this one switches to the autofocus drive speed of the lens during autofocus. So depending on what kind of autofocus you want to pull, whether it's slow, normal or fast, this is what you select. I tend to leave it on fast, but depending on what you're doing, you might like a slower focus pull. The tracking sensitivity, whether it's responsive or standard, you want your autofocus to be super responsive. Again, depending on what you're shooting, but I think for most of us, we'd like to have it on responsive. And then the auto slow shutter. So essentially what this does is we can see it sets the function that automatically adjusts the shutter speed following the brightness of the environment. This can cause kind of problems where you can get a shutter speed that's too slow and then everything is kind of trailing and it doesn't work great. So I tend to leave this one off. Audio recording. Do you want to record audio? Yes or no? Most of us will have this on. The audio record level, these are meters that go up and down. Essentially, if it's too hot, if it's too loud, if it's going to distort, these things are going to be off the charts. If it's too low, you'll see them, they're going to be very, very low. So this is an important one to have. On the audio level display, we want to see what we've just spoken about on the actual screen itself, right? Because we want to know when we're too loud or too low. Wind noise reduction, this is a process that's done in the actual camera. We can have this on or off and the camera attempts to reduce wind noise. Keep in mind if you are shooting in a windy environment, you need to be using the dead cat anyway up here, or dead kitten, that will help. But I would tend to leave the wind noise reduction off simply because it lowers the volume of your audio and it can screw things up. Not immensely, but it can kind of be a heartbreaker especially if you're starting out and you're like, my audio is really low, why is it? And can be wind noise reduction can screw it up. So I tend to leave it on off. And keep in mind, shoot with your back to the wind, so your back is a natural windshield. So basically you have the camera mic facing the opposite way to the wind, so the wind is hitting your back as opposed to the camera's mic, right? Makes sense? Good. Next one up, very important one. This is steady shot. We can have it as active, standard or off. So when you're moving around, the camera on the Sony ZV-1, and like a lot of Sony cameras, if you have this off, it's going to be like really bumpy and distracting to the viewer, and it's going to be a bit of a turn off visually. However, if we turn it to standard, it gets a little bit better, and then if we turn it to active, it gets pretty decent, so you can walk about with the camera. Don't get me wrong, this isn't like it's putting it on a gimbal, but it helps with the footage. The only downside is it crops in a little bit, so you're probably going to have to hold the camera out a little bit further, but we can all do the exercise, right? Let's move on to menu page 4. So the marker display, this is an interesting one that you're probably not going to pay a lot of attention to, but if you're into aspect ratios and stuff like that, it can help. So whether we want to turn this on or off is option number 1. And then the marker settings. So we want a center line, the aspect ratio, the safety zone. If you're into broadcast stuff, you know about a safety zone, which basically stuff is going to appear off screen. And then a guide frame. So the aspect ratio, we have all different ones here. Some of you might be old enough to remember old TVs, which had a 4:3 aspect ratio. I don't know who anybody that's old. You cinema aficionados may know that 185:1 is one of the cinema aspect ratios, and of course 2:35:1 is one of the bigger, wider cinematic aspect ratios. And basically when you've got this on the camera, it kind of looks all like this. So it's a good thing to have on, but it can clutter the display a little bit, so use if you need to use it. The recording lamp is the recording lamp in the front of the camera. I would suggest leaving this on because there are times when we've all forgotten to press record. I think every single camera should have a tally light, as it's affectionately known as, or a recording lamp. So movie with shutter, let's turn this on or off. What this means is you don't have to press the movie record button, but you can press the shutter button and it's going to start recording video. Really handy feature if you're just kind of fiddling around and trying to get it going. It is no harm to have this on. So number 5, shutter and steady shot, menu 5 in video. Let's go to shutter type here. So this selects the shutter type when shooting still images. You can leave this on auto, mechanical or electronic. I tend to leave it on auto, leave the camera decide that one. Release without card, so basically the shutter can go off and you don't have to have a memory card in there. Obviously it's not going to record anything, but you can still fire the shutter. And then steady shot, you can have this on or off for shooting images during movie mode. Tend to leave it on basically. Then menu 6 is the zoom options. So keep in mind, digital zoom is awful, but Sony have a thing called clear image zoom, which is really, really, really good. And if you enable this, you get an extra couple of millimeters on the lens that you can zoom in with. and it's worth experimenting with. See, does it work for you? I think it's really, really good. Otherwise, I would leave the digital zoom off and either stick with optical zoom, which means it's only the lens is going to do the zooming, and it's the glass, it's the optics, and then the clear image zoom is the one that Sony has a really good go, I don't know, with Skynet robots and stuff to figure out how best to zoom in a little bit more. And then the zoom speed, whether it's fast or slow, I would leave this on fast because zooming in video on the normal speed is incredibly slow. So leave it on fast. Then the 7th one here, the display button, this is basically what it's going to show when you press up, unless you've changed it. So we can turn these on and we can turn these off. Select what you want. Always good to have a histogram and the level on. Let's select enter. Next on the settings is a really important one, and it's zebra settings. So we can eyeball everything through the camera, but how do you know something is too bright or it's overexposed? Zebra setting. Select this, make sure it's on. You can change the zebra level to 95, 80, and so on. Basically how sensitive it is. Leave it at 100. Until you get a little bit more used to it and you can change it around, and then you can see exactly kind of what's exposed and what's not. The grid line, some of you will go with this. It's really handy to have these little grid lines to kind of help you pick out your composition on the shot. Obviously, good composition, the basics, there's loads of books out there. I'll leave a link in the description to one of them, but you know, have stuff where the lines intersect, try and have something interesting happening around there. So you can have the rule of thirds grid, which is the kind of standard one that most of us may be used to, or something that you could be getting used to really soon. And then there's the square grid, the diagonal. I tend to leave it on the rule of thirds grid. The exposure set guide will kind of display when exposure settings are changed in the shooting screen. Then the live view display, we can have the setting effect on or we can have it off. And then auto review will basically allow you to automatically review footage, whether that's for 2 seconds, 5 seconds, or 10 seconds. I tend to leave this off, but again, it's your own choice. Then the custom operations here, this is the one for photo, video, custom key, function menu set, movie button. And we're going to take a look at the custom key here for video. And we can see here, if you look at the guide, the trash can one, for example, that's going to follow the custom mode for photographs. So whatever you've set in photography, that's going to follow it here. Then I've set number 2 to focus mode, so I can quickly switch between automatic focus and manual focus. Then if I push mine to the left, I've got to customize to turn on and turn off the ND filter. Again, you can set these to whatever you want. It's really easy. Select what one you want and scroll through all of the options. Maybe I could change this to metering mode or select it again and I can jump back to ND filter. Really easy. And once you start using these, you will never look back because it makes you super efficient at using the camera. Something you're probably going to use a lot, for example, is in the ND filter option. I have this and it's just a push of a button and I can turn it on and turn it off really easy. So well worth keeping that one in mind. And then number 4, I have that following the custom photography one. So then we can look at the top button here as well. So the top one is the C1 button, and that's following the custom photography one, which as standard on the ZV-1, C1 is the focus background. Function menu set, I'm going to do a separate video on because this is something that gives you even more power. So when you kind of press the F-in button when you're out and about, this is the option that you get so you can swiftly jump between different things. But I'm going to show you guys some really good tips for this in another video. So make sure you hit subscribe and keep your eyes peeled for that one. Let's jump back into the menus here. Final option here, audio signals on, shutter only or off, leave them all on. Then the right date is something that you probably don't want. It's a bit old fashioned, isn't it? That you have the date on the image and stuff. So I tend to leave that off. The settings in the Sony ZV-1, they're pretty in depth. There's a lot of them there, but as you can see, they're really easy to change. It's really easy to customize. And speaking of things that are really, really easy, I've got an amazing video over here for you guys to watch that I know you're going to love. All right, so check that out. If you want some more Sony ZV-1 videos, if there's anything specific you'd like to see, let me know in the comments and hit subscribe. I'll see you in the next video, and until then, don't stop fighting for yourself.